Okay, so we're going to do just a little piece of notes and do a little bit more tomorrow. But we're going to start talking about basically the classifications of drugs. So drugs and crime. Illegal drugs can be defined as drugs with no current or accepted medical use in the United States. So that's what they deem it to be illegal by, is there is no accepted use medicinally in the United States, and that's why they are called illegal. Examples: heroin, LSD, cocaine, meth, speed, lots of them. Now, controlled substances are legal drugs whose sale, possession, and use are restricted because of their mind-altering effect of the drugs and the potential for abuse. So that would be things that are prescription. So things that you can't just buy at Kroger yourself, but it is drugs you can get as long as they are prescribed. So they are controlled, as in they are only prescribed when necessary, because they still have that potential for abuse, just like the illegal drugs. So that's going to be our narcotics, depressants, and stimulants. Some of them are all in those categories, like AD medication would be a stimulant. Narcotics, as in like hydrocodone, is a pain reliever pill, but is a controlled substance. Whereas another narcotic is heroin is illegal. Another stimulant is meth. So like legal version, ADD medication, hydrocodone. Illegal version, heroin, cocaine. But still, it's just difference between if they're sold or not is illegal or controlled. Of the top 8 arrest offenses in the United States, drug abuse violations continuously rank near the top. So right after notes, you're going to do a little activity on the opioid crisis. Opioid means opiates, so anything that is in the narcotics family, the pain relievers, so hydrocodone, oxycodone, heroin, morphine, all of those, there's been a huge spike for in our country for quite a while. Spikes just continually going up. So meaning the overdoses on them are going up. So it's called the opioid crisis. And there's a couple different things that we think it is caused by. The video that's posted with that assignment would help kind of walk you through like what has kind of happened to make this crisis exist now, because we didn't used to have so many overdoses on narcotics. But part of what goes into it is the criminalization of it. So basically, the more heavily we criminalize drugs, it actually has seemed to make it, there are more drugs available and more people using them. You would think the opposite would be true, that the higher the criminal penalty, the longer they get a prison sentence, the more likely you are to go to prison for using it or selling it. You would think that drug use would go down, overdoses would go down, but we have seen the opposite happen. We increased our criminal punishment for drug use, and it has increased drug use and increased the availability of finding drugs in the country. So the video will kind of help walk you through that. The little assignment will kind of help walk you through why we think that crisis might have occurred. But either way, facts are facts. Our drug abuse violations, meaning the people who are arrested with drug violations, is just below the top thing. So the top thing in their country that people are arrested for is property crime, meaning someone hurt someone's property. That's the highest thing, and that can be like a lot of different stuff. But the next barely lower is drug violations. So it's a very big issue of people being arrested in the country. So drug offenders make up more than half of the federal prison population, about 20% of the population in state prisons. So it's a huge chunk. A huge chunk of people in prison are there for drug violations. Over 25% of domestic violence disputes are drug-related. So most of the calls that they get, most of people who are arrested where there was some kind of altercation, some kind of assault, people fighting in their homes, 25% of those cases, one of them was using drugs. 81% of child endangerment cases are drug-related. So out of all the cases that we look at with CPS and kids being taken away from their parents, parents being filed on and ticketed for negligence and things, 81% of those cases are drug-related. So it is certainly an issue. The Controlled Substances Act in 1970 is kind of where we think we shifted. So federal law establishes 5 schedules of classification of controlled substances. We're going to talk about all 5 types, but we're only going to discuss 3 today. Is that right? No, we're going to 3 classes. But there's 5 schedules, just meaning levels of illegalness, basically. And they are based on the drug's potential for abuse. So you using it when you don't need to, getting addicted, that kind of thing. Potential to physical and psychological dependence. So that's you're addicting physically or you're addicted psychologically. Or its medical value. So if there is no medical value, it's going to be higher on the illegal list. Having some medical value, it gets less illegal and just being controlled like a prescription drug. So psychological dependence, you need it mentally. The conditional use of drug caused by underlying emotional needs. So that is a dependence. So then you are not actually physically, like it's not like there's something you need it in your body, like it didn't change your body necessarily, but it changed your mind, your want for it. Physical dependence means you actually need it physically, so you are going to have actual withdrawal symptoms. So physical need, you're going to go through sicknesses after stopping taking it because your body was used to having it. Click. Okay, so here's your 5 schedules. So Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, Schedule 4, and Schedule 5. Okay, so Schedule 1, drugs with a high potential for abuse and addiction, no medical value, heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and marijuana. I know that can be debated. I'm not going to debate on this. I'm just telling you what it is. Okay, so our Schedule 1, they say high potential for abuse, high potential for addiction, no medical value. Schedule 2, drugs with high potential for abuse and addiction have some medical value. So we have PCP, cocaine, amphetamines, most opiates. So those are pain relievers. So like oxycodone, things like that. And some barbiturates, another type of prescription drug. I find it a little weird. These are in there. But again, I'm not debating. I'm just telling you where they're listed. Schedule 3, drugs with less potential for abuse and addiction, currently acceptable for medical use. So some barbiturates, codeine, steroids. So those are controlled substances, but they're accepted for some medical use. So they are controlled and prescribed. Schedule 4, drugs with low potential for abuse, addiction, currently acceptable for medical use. Tranquilizers like Valium, Xanax, Librium. So these are where you're like antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, things like that, who do have some abuse and do have some addiction, but are also being prescribed for medical reasons. And then Schedule 5, drugs with low potential for abuse, has a medical use, lowest potential for dependency. So you're not going to need these drugs. So some pain relievers, so opiates, some non-narcotic ingredients like cough syrup, like things that are much lower level. A lot of these you probably would be able to buy like at the store yourself, not like you have to be prescribed. Now for our classes of drugs, how they relate them to what they do, there are hallucinogens, narcotics, stimulants, anabolic steroids, and depressants. I'm going to talk about just the first 2 today. I'm going to save the other 3 for tomorrow. So hallucinogens alter your normal perceptions, thoughts, and moods. Narcotics relieve pain and cause sleep. Stimulants increase alertness and activity. Anabolic steroids promote tissue growth. And depressants depress functions of central nervous system, cause calm, and bring about sleepiness as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about those 3 today because I really want to get to narcotics because that's what the opioid crisis is about. Opiates are narcotics. So hallucinogens, psychedelic drugs, increase awareness of sensory input. They affect the user's perceptions, thinking, self-awareness, and emotions, diminish control, and can cause panic. It's actually pretty common for people, kind of like having a freak out from what's happening to them because of the changing of your perceptions. The effect and intensity of response to these drugs varies from person to person. So hallucinogens by far are the hardest to classify or tell you about because they really do vary from person to person. Like LSD, acid, there are people who have taken one acid and are still tripping 20 years later. So and there are people who take it and felt nice and a few hours later were better and never used it again. So it really varies on how hallucinogens affect the brain. They're doing more studies on it now, but because of the fact that almost all of them are still illegal, it is hard to study them. If you didn't know that, like it's hard for scientists to get permission to study illegal drugs and their effects. And hallucinogens have been one of the hardest ones to push for, to actually start studying it. So not as much to tell you really, and I can tell you a lot more about how the other drugs affect you, but this is the one that's kind of a lot more up in the air. It changes from person to person. Each hallucinogen itself acts pretty different. Whereas like everything the narcotics, everything the stimulants, like most of them kind of all act the same. Hallucinogens, it's pretty different. LSD, ecstasy, mushrooms, marijuana, none of those are the same. So, but they're all hallucinogens. It's a little harder to categorize. So yeah, ecstasy increases heart rate, blood pressure, muscle cramps. These are things that you can do if you do drug overdose. Mescaline, read through those, I'll give you a second. LSD, which can also be called acid, yellow sunshines, doses, trips. Dilated pupils, loss of appetite, sleeplessness, increase in body temperature, increase in heart rate, sweating, dry mouth, tremors. So these are just all things that you would feel if it was going awry. PCP, so increased heart rate, blood pressure, convulsions, sweating, dizziness, numbness. You can certainly OD on these, okay? You can. So we'll talk about those more later. Now, marijuana also falls on this list. I'm sure you've heard that you can't OD on it. You really can't. Okay, so I'm not saying there isn't negative effects. There are, especially for young developing minds at your age. They have proven that. It does slow down growth, which you don't want in a time when your brain is developing so much as a teenager. But it is definitely lower than ecstasy. Last one we're going to talk about is narcotics. So act to reduce pain by suppressing the central nervous system's ability to relay pain messages to the brain, can produce tolerance and withdrawal. So basically a narcotic is going to reduce pain, usually cause sleepiness, but it certainly is going to build a tolerance, just like most other drugs, is you have to keep taking more and more of it to still have that pain release. So as you take more and more, you're getting closer and closer to that amount that your body cannot handle. So these are usually the scary drugs to worry about for overdosing. You definitely are going to have withdrawal symptoms. They make you physically dependent, so you will feel sick after trying to stop. Most narcotics are derived from this plant called the poppy, so opium poppy. Tolerance is a condition in which higher doses of the drug are required to produce the same effect experienced during initial use. Tolerance is often associated with physical dependence. So that's what we just talked about. You have to build it up. You're getting more and more physically addicted. You're going to have those withdrawal symptoms after regular use. Symptoms and signs of a withdrawal are often the opposite to the main effect of the drug. So like if it makes you feel no pain, the withdrawal symptoms are going to be very painful. And some examples of narcotics: opium. That used to be very big back in like Wild West days. But we've kind of taken opium and turned it into heroin, codeine, morphine, methadone, oxycodone, hydrocodone, all the odones and a lot of the enes are narcotics. The one we're going to talk about for the warm-up today was fentanyl. Fentanyl is basically like a chemically made heroin that's even more potent, but all those are narcotics. So what does it do? Heroin is one of the more addictive drugs due to the extremely short amount of time it takes to enter the brain. Okay. The drug is particularly dangerous because its purity is always a question. You don't ever really know what you're getting, leaving the user to guess how much of the drug can result in high and how much can result in a fatal overdose. So basically, just because you don't know how pure the sample you're getting, because you're buying a legal substance that they probably don't know how pure it is either. And you could take a dose that you think is the amount that you normally take, and it ended up being a stronger version. And now you're overdosing when you took the amount that you normally take. This is what it kind of does. Short term, you have these feelings: dryness, swarm, flushing, slow breathing, weakness. Heroin, addiction, tolerance, dependence, collapsed veins, infection of the heart, lining and valves. You can get pneumonia, decreased liver function, and different kind of abscesses. Now, how heroin makes you die, you should have got that from the warm-up video. Is it generally you fall asleep and your body forgets to breathe? That's generally how their overdose would look, is they're going to have too much CO2 build up because they literally just stop breathing. That's where we're going to stop today. Okay,